Hello everybody and welcome back to Odin's movie vlog. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. And today we're talking about the MCU, specifically the future of Thor and also the current state of Endgame and how the story still doesn't make sense despite the fact that many people on the internet have tried their best to explain that the timeline actually works, that their version of time travel actually makes sense. And the problem is that as much as those videos might make sense, it's not what they actually present in the movie. And if you have to really try that hard to explain the plot and to try to justify the plot's existence and that it somehow works within the context of the film, it should pretty much be very clear that no, it actually doesn't work. But before I get into that, let's talk about this new report that says Chris Hemsworth will indeed return to Thor for the MCU in Phase 4. This is something that I was pretty confident of. There were many people who were asking these questions on videos and in articles about, is Thor going to return? Well, for me, he was alive at the end of Endgame, and so therefore, maybe at this point in time, spoilers, at this point, if you're watching these videos, you should probably have a pretty good idea what's going on. However, since he does return at the end of Endgame, and he gives up his role as king because Asgard doesn't need a king, it needs a queen who's going to make some changes, as she says. Oh my goodness, there's so many cringeworthy scenes in that movie, and I love those two characters too. That's why I was so sad at the writing and everything was just Anyway, when it comes to this movie, though, I honestly thought that it was made it pretty clear because Thor ends up hiding up and teaming up with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and so it pretty much insinuates he will at least be with the Guardians in Guardians 3. We can assume, and that it likely will be he will continue to be Thor in an upcoming Thor 4 film because even Taika Waititi has said that he's interested in doing another film. He has obviously said that he's interested. He's still a young guy. He's meeting millions upon millions of dollars for this role, so he's not really going to go anywhere anytime soon. So I'm excited for this because I like Chris Hemsworth. I like his version of Thor, and also I overall think that Thor deserves to remain as Thor, as Chris Hemsworth's Thor, and not as this direction that they seem to be indicating that they might be trying to go with a female Thor and all this other nonsense that, again, if you're going to push characters that are already established and don't make them woke. Just present them as they are. But of course, we know Disney can't do that because, that's just what their MO is. As it says up here, the Hollywood Reporter is the one that is reporting on this. I'm, of course, using Bounding Into Comics because Bounding Into Comics is not a shill site. So it says there, Chris Hemsworth, i.e. Thor, who signed for Marvel for 5 movies in 2010, then renegotiated in 2017 for Infinity War and Endgame, putting himself in the $15 to $20 million range and ready for the next phase of films. Hemsworth has also had discussions with Kevin Feige about Thor 4. Feige said, look, we just have it to concentrate on Avengers now, so who knows? There are 76 cast members in these 2 Avengers films. They will be the biggest films of all time, far bigger than my character. It's a conversation for further down the road if it was going to happen, and I think it is going to happen because at the end of the day, I think they're going to look at Thor Ragnarok and see that it was financially very successful. Overall, many people have that film and hold that film in high regard. I know that I myself put it probably in my top 5 favorite MCU films, and that's just how well it's directed, how well it's written, and so hopefully they continue to go in that direction. I really, really, really hope they don't try and do any other type of nonsense, especially now that they've established that Captain America was able to use Mjolnir, and of course he still has Stormbreaker. I really hope, especially with all of this multiple reality nonsense that they're now starting to push, that doesn't eventually lead to them saying, oh, well, Mjolnir is still existing in some universe, and then all of a sudden they're able to cross over to that universe and bring in someone else who happens to wield the power of Thor, and it ends up being a version of Jane Foster or something like that, which again would just be nonsense. It didn't work in the comics. It won't work in the films either. But speaking of what's not working in the films, Endgame's plot still does not work, and I might do at some point down the line a full breakdown of why their version of time travel does not work. But of course, I'm just going to focus specifically on what director Joe Russo has said about the Captain America scene at the end of the film. And so, based on everything that's been established by the film, we look first to the words of Hulk himself. He says, no, when you go back into the past, that becomes your future. Which just in and of itself as a sentence does not make any sense, and that's pretty much all that he says about it. The only other thing that's really said about time in any way is when the Ancient One and him interact, and the Ancient One says that this is exactly how time works. The reality, or rather all the Infinity Stones together, they maintain the course of flow of time and of reality in the universe, and that only if you destroy one of those stones do you have an alternate reality, an alternate timeline that branches off from that, which is why the whole plan is, okay, well, what if we return all the stones back into the exact moment from they were taken, because then the timeline should stay exactly the same. However, if they do that, what they show is that time is indeed a flow, that time is indeed a straight line. That is exactly what they established in that one scene. So basically, in that scene, they contradict what Hulk himself had said at the beginning of the film. Now, of course, the Russos are going back and saying, oh no, it's because there's new timelines and there's new parallel universes, and that's what's being created every time that you go back in time. But what he was trying to say is that when you go back in time, you create a new timeline. Well, here's the problem with that, is that if you go back in time to take the stones and that alters the timeline and you create a new timeline, if you return to that same time initially, then you returning again creates another alternate timeline. So basically, there's an infinite number of timelines, essentially, that's being established. And I know that this is something that they've delved into the comics a little bit, which deals with, like, what, secret invasion, secret wars, where it basically is people jumping, jumping between the timelines and all these other things, which to me is just going to create a giant mess. Of course, it does leave open to the possibility of them bringing Robert Downey Jr. back if they want, bringing the characters who may have died off, because they're going to be able to say, oh, well, they're existing in a different timeline, so we're able to make it work. But as I said, they don't really establish that in the film as such, and if we're to believe the Ancient One that all the stones maintain reality and that if you take a stone out, that is what alters reality, well then every single time they've gone back and they've taken the stone, reality has been changed. Because if that is also coinciding with what the Hulk himself said, then obviously that would be consistent, because he says when you go back in time, guess what you do? That is now your future. So he insinuates that there seems to be a new timeline. However, he's now also saying that if you return a stone to that exact moment, that somehow the timeline that you've just created no longer exists, that it somehow comes back into the flow of time. As you can see, it starts to get very, very messy the more that you think about this movie, because they did not really think this thing through. What they did was they said, what is the most convenient way that we can introduce time travel in order to bring certain characters back, to have certain characters disappear, and to have people be talking about this movie constantly after the film? Oh, wait, that's right. Let's make up a version of time that does not work. Oh, well, we had physicists that said this is how time works, and yet they're not really able to explain it, and it doesn't make any sense within the context of what is revealed in the film. The other biggest problem, too, with the Ancient One is that she says that all the stones are needed in order for the flow of time to remain steady, in order for reality itself to exist. Okay. So, how in the hell, then, can the present actually exist? How can the prime universe, as I like to call it, because, we're doing prime universes, prime timelines, whatever it is, if you're trying to say that the prime universe still exists, how can it if all of the stones have been destroyed? If the stones themselves are what maintain reality, or what maintain the timeline, then how is it that destroying all of them, you still have time? You still have the flow of time at all? And I know that there's some people that say, oh, well, he doesn't say that they're totally destroyed. He says that he reduced them to atoms. That's an expression of saying he destroyed them. And if they were literally just the size of atoms, guess what you could have done? You could have gone into the quantum realm and just received those stones and found the stones that way, instead of having to mess up time. I know, River, I am just as frustrated as you are that they decided to go in this very messy direction instead of going into a much more, I would actually say, a more interesting direction to find out more about what is in the quantum realm. How does all of this work? Now, of course, some people try to say, well, the quantum realm is unstable, and so it's not always the same, and that's how they explain the fact that somehow Ant-Man is in there for 5 hours and it's 5 years on Earth, and then when you have the original Wasp go into the quantum realm and several years go by, somehow she ages, when in reality, if we use it on the same timeline they established with Ant-Man, with as long as he was in there, that time doesn't work, and they say, oh, well, it's unstable, so it could be different. It could be different at different points in time. It could be different at different places wherever that you might enter into the quantum realm. And it's like, okay, I can accept that too. I know, right? It's getting even more crazy, River. You're so right. So I can accept that only to a point, but it gets to that reality where you start to realize, okay, these are things that are starting to look really, really messy, and hopefully you start to understand why I just could not really like this movie, why I struggled to enjoy it, because I can dispense my, my belief. I can buy into a comic book universe, but when the comic book universe sets aside rules and then starts to break them, then at that point I can't. At that point in time, I get so distracted. I know, right? It's so distracting. It is. River and Willow are so right. It's so distracting, and I know they're cute, right? They're so cute. They're so adorable, even though they're loud. So I can only suspend my disbelief for so long before eventually it just starts to get really messy. And so as you can see here, these are from the director himself. He says, nope, not a time loop. Both the Ancient One and Hulk were right. They can't both be right because they contradict each other. You can't change the future by simply going back into the past, but it's possible to create a different alternate reality. Okay, so it's possible, or do you actually create a new reality? It's not a butterfly effect. Every decision you made in the past could potentially create a new timeline. For example, the old Cap, at the end of the movie, he lived his married life in a different universe from the main one. He had to make another jump to the universe at the end to give the shield back to Sam. So now they're saying, oh, he made a jump back. How could he make a jump back? He didn't have the Pym particle. He didn't have the machine itself, because in the reality that he supposedly went back to, is he saying that he lived out through the entire Thanos storyline? because if he returned to that time, and time it's another alternate universe, the events of that universe that were set in play, before that time would still be in play, and Thanos had been having this plan for a long time. So how is it that Thanos would not have been able to produce something very similar that would have required him to make a similar type of sacrifice in the first place? Again, the more you get into it, the less it makes sense. And anyway, as I said, doesn't make sense that he just, zips back into the universe, because some people say, oh, well, he chose to live out his life, and so he chose to be there because he knew that they would be there. But that doesn't work either, because if he's in a new alternate reality, if he's in a new timeline, well, then he can't, possibly coexist with the current present time. As I said, doesn't make any sense. Yes, the mouse saved the universe among the realities in those 14 million possible futures Doctor Strange foresaw. The mouse failed to press a button, and thus the heroes failed in those futures. Wow. Yeah, so they went there. So yes, the mouse hitting the button, that is the 1 in 14 million chance occurrence of it happening. I'm sorry, but that is still stupid. That is still so stupid. You could have easily just had kids breaking in, falling into it or something. That would have made a hell of a lot more sense than a rat. I'm sorry, that's ridiculous. To me, Captain America's action in the end wasn't the fact he wanted to change anything. It's more like he made a choice. Yeah, he made a selfish one because he knew that she would eventually meet somebody and have kids with them. So Cap became selfish. That has never been a part of Cap's character. So no matter which way you spin it, Captain goes against his character, and you at least break his character. You at least are inconsistent with the character that has been established not only in the comics but also in the movies as well. Good Lord. He chose to go back to the past and lived with the one he loved for the rest of his life. The time travel in this movie created an alternate reality. He lived a completely different life in that world. We don't know how exactly his life turned out, but I believe he'd still help out many when they were needed in the world, and yet somehow again, what about Thanos? Yes, there were 2 Captain Americas in that reality. It's just like what Hulk said. What happened in the past has already happened. If you go back to the past, you simply create a new reality. The characters in this movie created a new timeline when they went back to the past, but had no effect on the Prime Universe. What happened in the past 22 films was still canon. But as I said before, the problem is that they each go back to different points in time, and if you're going to hold this reality, then what you're saying is that every single time they went back, they create a new alternate timeline. And that if you go back and return the stone, that new timeline should already have in effect been created. But also, if you're going to follow that same rule, then not only are you going back to a timeline, but your very presence in that timeline that you've now created creates another timeline. So as you can see, giant mess, giant web and a mess. And then it says there, Russo's also indicated that Captain America more than likely did not just return to the 1970s in order to be with Peggy Carter, given that in the 1970s she was more than likely already married. He obviously returned to 1970 to return the Tesseract, but it's more than likely he also traveled further back in time to be with Peggy. Again, creating a lot of mess about, okay, how did he get the stones back? In what order did he give him back? And also, of course, that big question, what in the hell did he do with the Soul Stone, seeing that it was a soul for a soul, and that time I checked, you can't just return it. Did he just place it on the cliff so that the next person who went to go find the stones would find it just there? No, that's not how this... Again, that's not how it is. They establish rules, and they break them. And then he says, we can't answer this. For now, this is a story that happened in an alternate reality. Maybe it will be revealed in the future. And again, that is the reason they use this version of time travel. Because it was an excuse for them to say, yeah, our writing is really lazy, and our character development doesn't make any sense, and all these things are inconsistent, but that's the point. And this version of time travel allows for that because you can go back without any ramifications, and new timelines are created, and that's how we are able to talk about how all of these things are able to happen. Even as I said before, though, the Ancient One contradicts exactly what Hulk says. So, that's all I have to say about that. And as I said, I can spend more time poking holes in all of this timeline breaking nonsense. Let's just go back to the timeline and go back to the version of time travel that makes actual logical sense. You know, the physicists can say whatever the hell they want, but it still does not make any logical sense at the end of the day. Because I would much rather be, you go back to the past, you change an event, butterfly effect, you now create a new reality, you now create a new present. Because, again, if you're creating a new timeline every time you go back, giant can of worms. Anyway, guys, what are y'all's thoughts about this? Does this timeline make any sense to you? I already know I'm going to get a bunch of angry people saying, oh, the timeline makes sense. You need to watch this video. Trust me, I've watched the videos, and every single time I watch them, I say, okay, you may have answered this one part, but now you've just created more questions that are not covered, and also, it still does not take into account the fact that the movie itself does not address these concerns. The movie sets up rules. The movie decides to change the rules when it's convenient and break the rules in certain instances, and just say, oh, it's suspension of disbelief. Even in comic book films, there's still supposed to be rules that are set. Even if those rules are fantastical, as long as those rules are followed, it's okay. I know, River. I know. Just follow the rules, seriously. So what are y'all's thoughts on this timeline as River is now going completely off, but also what are y'all's thoughts about Chris Hemsworth returning as Thor? And do you think we're going to get a female Thor? I really hope that we don't, because I'd much rather them have an actually established, you know, popular female character be brought in and focused on, like, for example, Scarlet Witch, but they're putting her on the streaming service. You know, okay, she's going to the streaming service to have a romantic show with Vision, I guess. And again, that must be an alternate timeline, I guess, because, oh, that's the excuse now. Oh, we create alternate timelines and we can just justify whatever the hell that we want to do. They could have handled it better. And at least this film could have stated it as such and been as clear. But if you have to explain it this much, you haven't done anything right. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Like the video, smash the like button, give it a thumbs up, give it a subscribe, because you know all the MCU fanboys can come after me being like, oh, you're just hating on this movie all the time. No, I'm literally just poking the holes in it because I am a critic, and I'm a cynical one. I'm a realist. I stay grounded in reality, and this movie makes no sense. And now the directors are trying to retcon their own mistakes by saying, oh, this is how it works. Okay, the movie didn't say that. Anyway, guys, would love to hear more from you in the comments below. Please like and share and subscribe. You're all the best. Have a wonderful day, and as always, God bless.